Hello everyone, my name is Mrs. Anthony and I teach 5th grade at Pass Road Elementary, and today we are going to be learning all about stars and constellations. The standard that we will be focusing on today says that we're going to describe how constellations appear to move from Earth's perspective throughout the seasons. So our goal is to first of all understand what constellations are, and then we want to understand why they appear to move from our perspective. So the essential question that we want to keep in mind as we go: what factors affect the way that we see constellations? Because there are a few things that affect our perspective, so we want to figure those out today. So before we talk about constellations, we have to talk about stars, because constellations are just a group of stars that form a pattern. So first, let's knock that out. So a star is a giant ball of very, very hot gas, and they're mainly made of hydrogen and helium. And stars are held together by a force that we know is gravity. Stars go through a process that's called nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion, that's just kind of a fancy phrase for lots of atoms all together exploding. So those explosions, they release energy in the form of heat and light. So the light that we see from stars and the heat that they give off, it comes from nuclear fusion. Stars in the sky differ in size and temperature. So although when we look into the night sky, it sometimes seems like they're all pretty much the same size, but that's not the case. They are all very, very different. Kind of like a snowflake. They're all unique. And here is a picture of a star up close and personal. So even though we see beautiful, pretty, dainty, twinkling stars in the sky, if you were to get up close, which hopefully you wouldn't, but this is how they would look. Really scary. So the life cycle of a star. At birth, stars actually start out as giant clouds of dust. So gravity pulls that dust together into a bunch, and as the gravity gets stronger, the star gets hotter and hotter, and it becomes a protostar. Then the star goes on in its life, burning out energy for billions and billions of years. So stars last much, much longer than we do. And finally, after all of that glowing and all of that shining in the sky, the star will start to collapse because it's running out of hydrogen. So then it becomes a white dwarf star. Fun fact, in case you didn't know, the sun is a star. And it seems like the sun is just the center of attention. It is the center of our universe. And all the spotlight is just on the sun. And it kind of dims the spotlight of the other stars. And it sometimes confuses us and makes us think that the sun is much, much bigger than the other stars. But that's actually not the case. The sun is actually kind of basic, if you ask me, because it's pretty much the same size. It's just that it's much, much closer. It's actually the closest star to Earth. So that's why we can see it so clearly when we go outside. Not because it's bigger, not because it's brighter or stronger or anything like that, but simply because it's a whole lot closer. So sorry to expose the sun, but it's not as great as we think. Now, constellations. So now that we've talked about stars, let's move on to constellations. A constellation is a group of visible stars that form a pattern when viewed from Earth. The stars that we see in a constellation are actually very, very far from us. So again, even though it seems like when we look up into the night sky, it seems like these stars are pretty close, they're actually really, really far away. And the stars that are in a constellation together, again, it looks like they're close together, like they're maybe close neighbors, but they're actually spread pretty far apart. Constellations appear to move, but that is only because the Earth is rotating on its axis. So they're not actually moving. We are the ones that are moving. Scientists divided the sky into 88 different areas. How they did this, I have not a clue, but they divided the sky up, and these areas that they divided it into are known as constellations. Some of the most famous constellations were given the name of mythological figures. Ancient people also developed stories about these constellations, which we now know as myths. And you've probably read some yourself, and they're usually pretty interesting and cool to read. So, one very commonly known constellation is Ursa Major, which is also known as the Great Bear. It is the third largest constellation in the night sky, and many people in ancient civilizations saw the pattern as a bear. So that's why they gave it the name the Great Bear. And the myth that goes along with this constellation says that a beautiful, beautiful ancient woman was turned into a bear by an ancient goddess. So, myths, we don't know that they're necessarily true, but again, they are really, really cool and interesting to read. And maybe there is some truth to them. We don't know. The Ursa Major is well known for containing the Big Dipper, which I'm sure a lot of you all have heard about. And this constellation can be seen all year round, but it's most easily seen in the spring. So usually around March or April is where you can most easily see the Ursa Major. Then we have the Ursa Minor, aka Little Bear, and it represents a smaller bear with a long tail. It was actually one of the original constellations known to the ancient Greeks, and it's named after Ida, who took care of baby Zeus, who, if you've heard of Zeus, he's the king of the Greek gods. Even though most people don't know why she is depicted as a small bear, but that's what they call it. Ursa Major is well known for also containing the Little Dipper, and the Little Dipper contains the North Star at the tip of its handle. And this constellation can be seen all year long. So here we see Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and Polaris. And over here you see the North Star that's at the tip of Ursa Minor. Then we have my favorite constellation, Orion. And one of the reasons why it's my favorite is because it's one of the most extravagant constellations in the sky. And I like extravagant. So this constellation actually represents a giant hunter in Greek mythology. So in the sky, when you look up, Orion is shown raising his club and shield against a charging bull, which is actually the constellation's neighbor. And one feature that makes Orion pretty easy to identify are the 3 stars that represent his belt. From the belt is his sword, which contains one of the brightest stars in the sky. So as you can see from this picture, Orion, it is just extravagant. It is glowing, which I love. Again, Orion contains the brightest stars in the sky, and it's mostly visible in the wintertime. So we probably won't be seeing Orion here anytime soon until about December, January, when it starts to get a bit colder. Now, we've talked about stars, and we've talked about what they are, and we've talked about constellations and some of the most popular ones. But now we're going to talk about what affects the way that we see constellations in the sky. So, how are we able to see constellations? Constellations look like they're moving, but they actually don't. Like we said earlier, the reason that they look like they're moving is because the Earth is rotating. So we are the ones that are actually moving, and we're revolving around the sun. So the constellations that we see depend on a few things. For one, whether it's night or day. 2, where you're located on Earth. And 3, which season it is when you're looking. So we're going to dive into these a little bit more. So night or day. Every 24 hours, the Earth rotates on its tilted axis, as you can see here in the picture. As Earth rotates, part of the Earth faces the sun, When that part is facing the sun, it's daytime. And then the other part of the earth faces away from the sun. So, of course, it's nighttime. Stars and constellations are only visible during the nighttime. So the only star that we'll see during the daytime is the sun because it's so close. But everything else, it must be nighttime. The location on Earth. So Earth has an imaginary line splitting it in half that is called the equator. You guys have probably heard that before. People above the equator in the northern hemisphere see different constellations than people that live below the equator in the southern hemisphere. People that live right at the equator can see some of the constellations in both hemispheres. So they're lucky living on the equator because they can see a little bit of both. In the northern hemisphere, people can see the circumpolar constellations all year long because they are directly above in the sky. And that is all about constellations. I want you guys to remember the main factors that affect how we see them. Remember, whether it's night or day, also the location on Earth, and finally, which season it is that you're looking for that constellation. So I hope you enjoyed today's quick video about stars and constellations. And that, as always, I will see you all next time. Bye.